This video got me working thrice as hard, but I hope it'll clear up the question, which one is better, the POCO X6 Pro, the F6, or the Infinix GT20 Pro? I'm gonna tell you straight away, this is going to be a super beefy video, so grab something to snack, get comfy, and let's get started. Selamat pagi! Good morning everyone, Kenneth here, and welcome to my budget gaming phone comparison video. As usual, what you're getting is my own honest opinion, and I would really appreciate if you use my affiliate links before buying stuff. But let's go through the test procedure first so you know what to expect. And basically, similar to the usual gaming test, I will be starting from 100% battery on a cool phone below 36 degrees Celsius, but I'll keep playing for 40 minutes straight with COD Warzone, Honkai Star Rail, and Wuthering Waves in order. The specific area where I'll be testing is also similar. We'll max out the settings, put it on 60 FPS except for COD Warzone, which I test in 2 presets, but hopefully this will give a comparable data between the 3 phones, which we'll break down finally at the end. Okay, hit the thumbs up if you're excited, and let's talk about the first phone, the POCO X6 Pro, which is my friends. This is actually the cheapest one at around 260 bucks if the 8 plus 250 gig version is available in your area. But let's get gaming with it, starting with COD Warzone. Like I said, I'm gonna be testing 2 different presets here. First is smoother gameplay on Mobile Royale mode, and later the higher graphic detail on Team Deathmatch. So kicking off with the drop scene here, we're actually starting out from 30 FPS when viewing the map from high up. But as we get closer to the land, the frame rate slowly creeps up, and until we touch the ground, we finally reach 60 FPS. Fortunately, throughout the process, the game doesn't feel too choppy at all, which is good. And this was a pretty quick match since I died quite early, but then respawned again, so I had a second chance to run a little bit more. Throughout the gameplay, it was mostly a smooth experience, close to 60 FPS solid, if you can see in the performance monitor graph here, except for when I got hit and the vignetting effect comes in. That's when we see a little drop to the 50 FPS range. At this point, my timer turned off, but it was about 12 minutes into the game, and we're actually pushing the phone quite hard as we are 40 degrees hot on both top and bottom part of the screen. And then we move on to the higher graphic detail on Team Deathmatch, which locks at 30 FPS, but we get to see much more action going on, so let's see how it goes. For most of the game, it was a solid 30 FPS, and we can actually see the temperature dropping, most likely a result of a smaller map, so the phone doesn't have to render as far. No matter if there is a vignetting effect going on or smoke grenades being thrown around, the frame rate stays stable and shows how Call of Duty actually does a great job in giving an optimized gameplay for each preset they made. We ended the game with 40 degrees top and 38 degrees bottom, and we used up 7% battery for the 19-minute session with a battery temperature of 42 degrees. The result is pretty much in line with the gameplay I shown on my review, but let's quickly hop onto Honkai Star Rail now and let's see how it performs. I know it's a given, but I'm using the performance mode, or it's called Wild Boost now in POCO, and for this game I'm using very high preset and changed the FPS to 60 to test the maximum capability of the phone. And starting off with the walk at Penacony's Golden Hour, this heavy place pins the X6 Pro down to 20 FPS at the start, but then goes back up to the 30s as we walk down a street, although only until we go after the pinball machine we finally get to see 37 to 40 FPS, but with a steadily rising temperatures. 4 minutes in and we move on to the Sunday big boss fight. The phone is already at almost 43 degrees top and 40 degrees bottom, with frame rates fluctuating between 45 to 55 and sometimes going down to the 35 range, as you can see in the graph. The second half, where the boss prepares for that one big attack, is actually pretty taxing as we see it staying on 40 FPS quite a bit. Finally, farming materials with smaller enemies actually doesn't make it any better. We're seeing similar performance and actually similar temperatures too throughout the fight scenes, which I think is the limit that POCO has set here. At the end of the 11 minutes gameplay, we are at 43 degrees top and 40 degrees bottom, and on the battery side we are at 45 degrees with around 6% of battery usage. That's pretty hot in today's standard, but we're going to talk more about this at the end. I've prepared some nice graphs so it's easy for you to digest, but now let's go through Wuthering Waves first and let's see how it performs. This game was just released back when I first reviewed the X6 Pro, so finally I can show you how it performs for the first time. We're maxed out at advanced 60 FPS starting from a hot 42 degrees phone. You will see the long-term performance here because the phone is already hot. But you know, the temperatures still quickly rise up close to the 45 degree limit as soon as we jump down to farm some echoes in a sea of flames. And just pay attention because as soon as I summon my Dragon Echo, the frame rate just tanked to 15 FPS. Only until it's done did the FPS went back up to the 20 to 30 FPS range. Same thing with the next enemy group. As I get closer, just playing around with the grappling hook, we're down again to 16 FPS. And the game constantly stays there. As you can see, when I quickly flick the camera, it was so jittery. And the game never touches 30 FPS in the sequence. And same thing happened with the next enemy group, so I won't go into it again. Next up, with fighting the Dragon Jiwei, this is similar to domain farming in Genshin Impact, so there's less render distance and there's only one enemy to take care of. So as you can see, the FPS is much better at around 40 to 50 FPS constantly throughout the fight. Of course, there's a little spike and dips every now and then, as you can see in the graph. But interestingly, when farming level up material within a much smaller space, the FPS fluctuates much more, even staying at below 20 FPS for a good few seconds there, and recovers only to the 30-40 FPS range. I mean, just a few more enemies could do this? Really? Anyway, we finished the 9 minutes gameplay with 40 degrees top and bottom and used up 5% battery down to 82% at the end of the 40 minutes gaming session. Battery is at 44 degrees now, which is cooled down a little bit thanks to probably the dragon part in the middle. But still, the temperatures are pretty high and I think it's a reason behind the frequent dips because we simply hit the temperature limit and we need to cool the phone down. Okay, that's 1 out of 3 phones done and hopefully you're still here to see the other phones in action. By the way, I'm going to test these phones with a cooling fan next, so subscribe for that. And not to waste time, let's quickly go over the second phone now, the Infinix GT20 Pro. And thanks to TideDrawIt, we finally have a real-time FPS meter with Taco Stats. Now, this phone goes around 270 bucks in Indonesia, and specs-wise, it might not wow you because it's maxed out at 12 plus 256GB storage, uses older Dimensity 8200, but the ultimate variant, which could be just an overclock. And on synthetics benchmarks, it just doesn't post amazing scores. But let me tell you, there are a lot of things that makes this the better gaming phone. You can check my full review after this video, but I'm gonna show you through real gaming tests starting with COD Warzone now, and we'll talk as we go. Let's break down Mobile Royale on smoother gameplay setting first, and pay attention to how the FPS jumps straight to 55 FPS as soon as we get off the chopper. As I look around the map, there was some dip into the 46-48 FPS range, but then halfway to the ground, we are back above 55 FPS, which is already better than the X6 Pro. Gameplay is pretty solid too. Generally, it's almost 60 FPS gameplay with some occasional dips here and there. Just towards the end of the game, we got surrounded, the vignetting effect came in, and I can finally see some moments of 48 FPS, but otherwise, it's a very solid game throughout. But now let's check out the higher graphic detail setting on Team Deathmatch mode, and as a heads up, the graphic setting maxed out at low, which is the same as the POCO X6 Pro. Okay, so 10 minutes in and we are only at 34 degrees top and 30 degrees bottom. That's a crazy low temperature, as if we haven't been using the phone at all. And well, I'm happy to report that throughout the match, I never see any FPS dips at all, with it staying between 28 to 30 FPS at all times. And actually looking at the GPU and CPU temperatures, we can see that it's stable below 50 degrees, which means the game isn't pushing the phone as hard as Mobile Royale, which gradually increased over time and reached 60 degrees at the end of the game. We finished the session with 33 degrees top and the same 30 degrees bottom, and in this 18 minutes COD gameplay nets us 4% battery usage, or actually around 5%, but we'll talk more about this later, and the battery temperature is at 35 degrees. I just can't express how incredible this temperature is. But let's keep on moving to the next game, Honkai Star Rail, and see how it plays at very high 60 FPS setting. Now, walking in Penacony's golden hour, we're seeing a little bit jittering here, especially when there are a ton of NPCs and buildings in the view. And as I pan around, you can see that the phone performs in the range of 25 to 35 FPS. And then after the pinball machine, we finally seeing a solid 40 FPS. I would say this is tied with the X6 Pro, although for the first time ever, we can see the CPU GPU cores are being pushed super hard, touching 85 degrees there at the end. Moving on to the weekly boss battle now, we're starting off pretty strong with 45 to 50 FPS, and stays mostly there with temperatures in check, never touching 80 degrees throughout the fight. But keep in mind that this is the temperature in the CPU cores itself, okay? That's why you never see that kind of temperature. And the second half also didn't see any significant drops except for the very end where the boss dies and there are particles and smokes being rendered, and we see it drop to 37 FPS for a brief moment. Same thing with farming materials with smaller enemies. It's mostly a 50 FPS experience except for the brief moments during Acheron's ultimate. We can see 40 FPS for a bit there. But yeah, we played for almost 12 minutes here and used up 7% battery, or if the previous COD numbers are adjusted, it'll be 6%. But again, I'll talk about it later when we project the numbers into 1 hour estimates. Temperature is at 42 degrees top and 36 degrees bottom, so it's pretty warm, but the X6 Pro was warmer. Moving on to Wuthering Waves again with a maxed out advanced 60 FPS setting, we can see that dropping down from the teleport point in the Sea of Flames, we're getting mostly 48 FPS only until we drop down and fight, the FPS drop to the 30s. I immediately used the Due Echo as well, but only after a few seconds later did the FPS drop down to 1920 and then quickly jumps back to the 30s. This is similar with the other group fights as well in other areas. The frame rate does drop to the low 20s, but because it drops slowly over time, the game doesn't feel as jittery as it was with the X6 Pro, especially when moving and panning cameras around very quickly. Although yes, we do see a low point similar to the X6 Pro at 17 FPS, so it's just the limitation of the GPU and the chip itself, or perhaps also the optimization of the game itself. But then let's move on to the domain battle with the dragon now, and we can see that it started off strong at around 50 FPS, and then it had some drops to the low 30s and then stabilizes around 45 FPS. Similar story also happens with a few more enemies while farming level up materials here. The game runs mostly in the low 30 FPS with dips sometimes down to around 20 FPS, but again, it doesn't feel as laggy. Perhaps maybe because the frame rate drops happens in between skills and attacks and not while moving the camera, so I don't notice it as much. We finished the 8 minutes gameplay with 4% battery usage and 40 degrees top, 36 degrees bottom. And after playing for 40 minutes here, we are now at 85% battery left, which is better than the X6 Pro. And not only that, the temperature across the board is also better. But especially the battery, it's usually 1 to 2 degrees cooler, and combine that with bypass charging, this is actually the only feasible gaming phone if you're looking at hours and hours of gaming use, unless you use a cooler fan, of course. Finally, let's tackle the last and the newest phone, also the most expensive at $300 for the 8 Plus 256 gig variant. It's not too much price difference if I'm gonna be honest, but on paper, this is the most exciting one because the Snapdragon 8S Gen 3 here is so fast, at least on benchmarks. Well, let's see how does it compare with the other phones, starting with COD Warfare. Kicking off with a mobile royal game on smoother gameplay setting, this time I use both Taco Stats as well as Xiaomi HyperOS built-in performance monitor, which shows you the helpful graph in real time. And you know what? Right off the bat, we're dropping down with a solid 60 FPS until we land. That's a very strong performance, and as you can see, even a bit later into the game, there is no sign of throttling at all. The CPU and GPU temperatures never reach even 60 degrees. The only FPS drop we can see is when I look down on the dam. The drawing distance is quite far, and that's when the frame rate goes down. It's insanely powerful and chill too, because we ended the 8 minutes game with 34 degrees top and 32 degrees bottom. Now, because the chip is stronger here, we do have the option to pick medium graphics settings, which is what we will use for the higher graphics detail preset. And you know what? Team Deathmatch after that plays at the rock solid 30 FPS. No vignetting, no flashbangs or smoke from the rocket launcher could phase it. And after 21 minutes into the game, we are at 36 degrees top, 38 degrees bottom, and battery at 38 degrees too. And also I said 21 minutes, but you see 18 minutes on the video. That's because I forgot to start the timer while changing the graphics settings, so sorry about that. Moving on to Honkai Star Rail now. Again with advanced preset and 60 FPS frame rate, we start the test by walking in Panaconi's golden hour again. And as usual, we're seeing 30 FPS FPS here, but then as I pan the camera around the buildings, the frame rate rises to 40 FPS, even almost touching 50 at a time, which is very impressive. But then as we go down and put the NPCs into view, the frame rate goes back to the 30-40s range, and after the pinball machine, we can similarly find around 40 to 45 FPS too. This is definitely smoother than the other two before. Fighting the weekly boss now, we can see from the temperature that the GPU is working harder than the CPU. Frame rate mostly stays between 45 to 55 FPS with rare dips to the low 40s. And notice the SKN, or the skin temperature, which is steadily increasing, touching 47 degrees at a point where the boss charges for its ultimates here. But good thing is the actual temperature of the screen is not as hot at just 40 degrees top and 36 degrees bottom. Fighting smaller enemies, we can see the POCO X6 being the closest one to 60 FPS. But still, the dips are there, again during Acheron's ultimate especially, where we can see it hover around 30 FPS, even down to the 27 FPS for a brief moment. We ended the 10 minutes Honkai Star Rail with 40 degrees top and 36 degrees bottom. Hardly a change throughout the game, which is great, although it's quite power hungry at 7% battery usage. And stay tuned, we'll compare this with the other phones very shortly. Moving on to the last test, finally, wuthering waves on the POCO X6. We're starting still with the same temperature as before, and while dropping down to the Sea of Flames map doesn't show any problem at around 50 FPS. It's when we get into a fight with multiple enemies and summoning the Dragon Echo, you can finally see the FPS got obliterated down to the 13 FPS and stayed under 20 FPS for quite a few seconds there. You can see it in the graph, it really goes all over the place here, just like the other phones, except that the POCO X6 can go up to the 40-50 FPS and then drop down immediately to below 20. This results in a jittery gameplay rather than playing at a constant 30 FPS or even 20 FPS at all times. Interestingly, the CPU is now hotter at 70 degrees than the GPU here, maybe because it has to take care of the logic behind the multiple enemies we're fighting. But tackling the dragon in a more confined space here, honestly, I don't see any sign of the temperatures cooling down. The average FPS we could see here is mostly 40, sometimes up to the 50 FPS. And again, with more enemies when farming for level up materials, the phone struggles as it plays an average of 30 FPS with frequent dips to the 20 FPS range. Only when there is one enemy left and we're facing the wall did the frame rate rise close to around 40 FPS. Finally, we wrap up the 7 minutes wuthering wave session with 40 degrees top and almost 38 degrees bottom. And on the battery side, we are at almost 44 degrees and we used up 5% battery. While temperatures are very similar to the Infinix, which is great, but note this, the POCO X6 uses the most battery for the whole 14 minutes gaming session here. So I've compiled all the battery consumption data for each phone here, and starting with the POCO X6 Pro, you can expect around 22% per hour of COD Warzone, 31% for Honkai Star Rail, and 33% for Wuthering Waves. Do note that this is an estimated number based on how long we are in the game versus how much battery we used, but the limitation here is the battery percentage, which is not detailed enough. That's why we see on the Infinix battery usage for Honkai Star Rail is abnormally high, while COD Warzone is abnormally low. If I normalize and adjusted the battery percentage, so maybe we were at the tipping point before the battery dropped 1%, we can see the estimates become 17% for COD Warzone, 31% for Honkai Star Rail, and 30% for Wuthering Waves, which is more in line with my test I did before and comparable to the X6 Pro numbers as well. On the other side, we got the POCO X6. Now, these numbers are off the charts. I mean, I was checking things back and forth just to confirm, and I came back to the same conclusion. The Snapdragon 8S Gen 3 is very power hungry if you pin it at high performance use. No wonder why I found charging this phone more often, like it doesn't feel like a 5000 mAh phone at all. Fortunately, it's got a fast 90-watt charging, although it does get pretty hot. But now let's check out all the estimated numbers compiled here so we can see that while the POCO X6 is pretty efficient in COD Warzone, which is basically when the phone is chilling, but when being pushed hard, the chip is very demanding and basically blows every other phone away in power consumption. Now, I know the most important metric to talk about here is power consumption per frame, but unfortunately, I have to learn more to decipher this data sheet. And in this test, I didn't know the app existed when I recorded the X6 Pro, so I didn't use it there. But from what we have with the Infinix and POCO X6, we can can see some equally important metrics like average FPS, frame rate percentiles, and the frame times. And let's talk about that quickly, starting from Honkai Star Rail. Yes, the POCO F6 does get slightly higher average FPS at almost 50 compared to the 46 on the Infinix, but you can see that the 95 percentile, basically 5% of the test, it dips lower to 20 compared to 25 on the Infinix, and on the 99th percentile, or 1% of the time, it actually stopped at 0 FPS, while the Infinix managed 11 FPS. Frame time is also a very important indicator as it directly connected to the feeling of lag, but both phones are similar here. And let me know if you want a deep dive about these metrics down in the comments, because they're very nitty-gritty but very interesting at the same time. Okay, I promise you this will be the very last graph. I averaged the temperature between the top and the bottom part of the screen, and as you can see here, the POCO X6 Pro is the warmest of the bunch. The POCO F6 is in the middle, and the Infinix takes the lead, especially in COD Warzone section. And then you take the price into consideration. I think it's pretty clear which one is the best budget gaming phone. My pick still goes with the Infinix GT20 Pro, but then again, many of you said that 256 gigs of storage is pretty limiting, or it looks too edgy here, in which case the POCO can be a good alternative, and it comes down to your budget. The X6 Pro is $300 and F6 Pro is $320 for half a terabyte. If you want to know more about these phones, I'll link my review down in the description, and please support the tremendous work I've put into this video by using the affiliate links. I hope this was helpful, and thank you so much for watching. I'm Kenneth. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.